Well, I'll just start with just an introduction as folks keep joining. My name is Lauren Buda. I'm the founder and CEO of Girls Security. For some of you, I don't know, and we're really grateful for you taking the time to be with us this afternoon, especially amid so much happening in the world and in your lives. We really appreciate you taking the time to gather for this event, Diversity and National Security at Work. I'll just share a really brief insight into some of the conversations we've been having at Girl Security. Primarily, when we started Girl Security, identity was a really central core of our message. We really wanted to have a conversation about identity as it relates to national security. And we realized in engaging with girls that we really needed to kind of deconstruct what identity means, whether it's kind of the color of your skin or whether you identify as a boy or a girl or you don't identify at all, whether it's your religious or faith-based beliefs, your associations, your familial relationships. And so we found that that conversation is taking a much more kind of, I would say, a deeper turn in recent months, where we're finding that we really have to be talking about these issues in order to even explore what diversity and national security looks like. We have to talk about equity. We have to talk about elitism. We have to talk about racism and misogyny and all of these things. And so we're really trying to find or create a space, especially with girls and young women, to have these kinds of conversations, because we really believe that the lived experiences that arise from each of our identities and relational and otherwise can help inform not just a more inclusive national security strategy, but a more inclusive national security workforce. And so before I introduce our awesome, amazing panelists, I'd love to just highlight Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, who is the founder and executive director of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. And Ambassador Jenkins has been an honorary advisor to Girls Security and just an absolute remarkable role model for so many people. In addition, she was recently appointed as the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Affairs with the Biden-Harris administration, which is really exciting. So Ambassador Jenkins, if you wouldn't mind just saying a few remarks, and then we can introduce the panel as well.
Yes, great. Thanks, Lauren, and thanks, Girls Security and Out in National Security, for being great champions with us on this issue. And we are happy that we're going to be doing more work with Girls Security, who we are now officially partners with. So we'll be doing more of these kind of engagements, and we hope that all of you will continue to be involved in these things. And I just want to say it's really great to see all of you here. It's so important to understand issues of identity and its impact on national security. I think that, we should be having these conversations early in life, all throughout life. And so it's really great to see, so many of you here. My organization, WCAPS, which was started in 2017, focuses on diversity. Diversity is an important part of it in bringing in different voices and recognizing the importance of all voices in strengthening American policy, U.S. national security. So we are very happy to be a part of this effort, WCAPS, along with Out National Security and Girl Security. We'll keep doing more work with these organizations. And if you want to find out more about WCAPS, we're easy to find. It's wcaps.org. You can find out about our GINSER program, our mentorship programs, which we're going to be doing more in conjunction with Girl Security, and also our Pipeline Fellowship program, which is also something I'll put that in the chat. But just thanks for all of you being here and all the amazing panelists who will be part of this discussion. So back over to you, Lauren.
So as Ambassador Jenkins noted, we're joined by panelists representing Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, as well as Out in National Security. Again, we'll put both orgs' websites up. Check them out, follow them on social media. It's amazing content, inspiring content, important content. So I'm just going to briefly introduce the panelists and just ask them to say one or two things about themselves. Their bios are extremely rich, and we'll be sharing the full bios as well. But I always find it's wonderful to know what individuals like to highlight about themselves. So I will start with Laila Ujayli.
Hi all, my name is Leila, she, her, hers. I'm currently an associate editor over at Instinct Media, where we talk about foreign policy in ways that are super easy and accessible to understand. I'm also a master's student at the University of Oxford, where I'm a Rhodes Scholar, and I study public policy and film.
Thanks, Layla. And then next is Maritza Adonis.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Hi, everyone. I am Maritza Adonis. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of MTA Vision's Global Corporate Social Responsibility and Government Relations firm. We work between the intersections of economic development, public policy, diplomacy, and we are super excited to be here today, hopefully to encourage all of you to enter into the field, and you'll learn a bit more about me in our breakout groups. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much. And next is Rachel Thomas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Thomas, she, her, hers. I am currently the Senior Military Advisor for the Office of Global Women's Issues at the Department of State. I work more on the women, peace, and security side, but I'm a little bit of an unorthodox person because I am a active duty Navy Foreign Area Officer. And I am a queer mixed Black woman of color. So a lot of intersectionality is going on there. But I find this really important for us to talk about and be in the space to understand just our different perspectives. And so I'm really glad to be here and to have this space with everyone.
Thank you so much. Next is Warda Khalid.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Wardah Khalid, and I'm based here in Washington, D.C. I'm a policy analyst, activist, and speaker on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, refugees, immigration, and Islam in America. And I most recently worked on Capitol Hill, working as a congressional fellow in the office of Congresswoman Judy Chu, where I did foreign affairs, national security, defense, and immigration. And outside of that, I have a nonprofit that I started called Polygon Education Fund to teach Muslims how to engage with Congress. And I'm currently working on that as well as doing some consulting work and career coaching. And I'm very excited to be here with you all.
Thank you so much. And Ami Sanchez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for having me. My name is Ami Sanchez. I am currently a lobbyist where I work directly with members of Congress and their staff to address issues facing the defense industrial base on behalf of my clients, which are usually small businesses doing business with the DoD. As a lobbyist, I also get to do very cool pro bono work where I can, like with organizations like Girls Security, where I get to educate members of Congress and their staff on the importance of supporting women and girls in national security roles. I did a stint at DoD. Before that, I spent 8.5 years on Capitol Hill, where I worked for 4 different senators, 3 of whom were women, and served as general counsel for the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, where I got to do some very, very cool work on really complex, politically contentious issues like immigration reform, healthcare reform through the Affordable Care Act, and regulatory reform. When I was in the Senate, I was the only Latina general counsel for any of the 16 standing U.S. Senate committees. And I'm just really excited to be with you today and to talk to you about kind of the intersection of race, gender, law, policy, and national security.
Thank you so much, panelists. And I think I gave the wrong instructions, which, hey, what else is new? That's where we are. So I think what we can do, though, is we have questions that were submitted, which will hopefully touch on some of the remarks that the panelists can share, generally speaking, but we can always cover ground. And now we've saved a few minutes for live questions as well. So I'd like to start with the first question that was submitted by Hannah, age 14. Which is, how does national security impact marginalized communities? And what I'd love to do, maybe in the order of introductions, our panelists can share their thoughts on how national security impacts marginalized communities.
So I think that means that I can dive in. So I for me, I come from a background where my family is Syrian and I'm a Muslim. So in those ways, the national security architecture in the United States has impacted my community daily. And US foreign policy impacts my extended family abroad. So for marginalized groups, national security can have really real impacts, whether that's through Muslim bans or militarized foreign policy or surveillance. These are decisions that impact us every day, and we often don't have a hand in making them, which is why I'm so excited to see so many of you on the call.
I guess I can share as well too. So just kind of pointing to some of the work that MTA Visions has worked with. So we have an opportunity to do some work with a lot of marginalized groups, and we can talk about some of the benefits that national security has had on other nations in the forms of diplomacy and in international development. So some of you guys might know that the United States provides billions of dollars of international development to other countries, whether it's through food insecurities or through healthcare. And so there's two prongs to this side. There's things, of course, that national security can have a negative impact, but there's also lots of positives and plus on that as well too.
All right, I'm surprised that I remembered the order, so this is great.
Thank you, Rachel.
So national security, when we talk about national security and impacting marginalized groups, a lot of times, especially when we talk about foreign policy, the people that we are helping around the world are marginalized populations, or a lot of the times we are trying to make sure that marginalized groups and populations are part of the solution for the societies that which we live in. Not only that, looking domestically, we're dealing with a lot of marginalized populations, and those populations have, we have those perspectives and experiences that we should be bringing into how we engage on national security. And finally, we're getting to the point where national security is broadening rather than just the traditional hard power, weapons, military, defense security, to understanding all of the different facets. So climate security, health security, food security, and a lot of these impact marginalized populations much more than they do other of the majority population. So that's like the really big part that we play and we try to do, is to make sure that everyone is involved in these decision makings, and that we're able to just bring in everybody so that everyone's diverse perspective is counted and heard.
All right, I think I'm next. So I think also as a Muslim woman of color, I would echo a lot of what Leila said about national security absolutely impacts my community. And we've seen this, and I'll add that I think especially after 9/11, we've seen this with pieces of legislation, including the Patriot Act. We've seen it with FBI sting operations against Muslims or Arabs. We've seen it with surveillance of students who are in Muslim Students Association, surveillance of mosques. So it impacts our community a lot, and it can become very exhausting being an activist and a member of this community, because it seems like it just doesn't stop. I mean, now we've got a conversation happening about white domestic terrorism, and there's an argument going on of whether we need a new domestic terrorism law to deal with them, because our community has already been marginalized under these laws, and we will continue to be marginalized along with Black and other brown immigrant and Native communities if new laws are put in place. So it's really difficult, because when we talk about national security, it absolutely has a personal impact on our lives. I will add that as somebody who also worked on immigration, how we deal with our borders in national security is huge as well. And that ties into foreign policy as well. One thing that I worked on when I was on the Hill was the detention and forced feeding of South Asian asylum seekers at the southern border who are fleeing oppression in India, in Nepal, and they come to the US and they're thrown in detention centers and they're not given hearing dates, and then they're force fed when they go on hunger strike because they have no option and they're not getting resources in their languages. And that is absolutely national security, and it impacts these people who we're supposed to be helping when they come to our shores. So I see it as a hugely personal thing. And, I'm excited that you guys are interested in this topic, because we need so many more voices speaking out against these atrocities.
Wow. Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone said. To dovetail on what Rachel was saying, particularly from the policy making perspective, I think there is a a tendency for to look at things strictly in terms of how kind of a policy impacts a marginalized community. I think there's also now we're starting to see, particularly with organizations like WCAPS and Girls Security, a look the other way. So how can marginalized communities have a voice in the policymaking process to make these policies more beneficial for these communities? I think with what Warda was saying on immigration, I see this particularly in terms of economic impact. When we talk about kind of things like, trade, tariffs, and, negotiations between countries, all these things, that can have an impact on not just the, the economic policies, but on the policies that affect you as like, a person. So yeah.
Those were all just tremendously important frameworks, I think, especially for girls and young women. And I know from the conversations we've been having recently as well, and this is something that comes up oftentimes, participants, who participate in our program and identify as girls, or especially girls from particular like Latina, Latinx, they come to the table with very strong associations with issues like immigration at a very young age. And so I think what I hear, which is quite reassuring to me, is that we can't shy away from unpacking those conversations, because I think, at least as an organization, our purpose is really providing those populations, providing all of you, right, with as much insight as we can offer to help frame your thinking, and hopefully a lot of support, so that if you do choose to participate in these issues, you have the tools that you need. And so I have a wonderful question, and first of all, correct me if I pronounce this improperly, and if you're joining, is it Chinyu? Would you like to ask your question right? And did I pronounce your name right?
Yeah, you pronounced it right.
Okay. This is a really important question, and it's one we're talking about a lot. I think national security sounds like a great field, but lately, due to racial justice issues and riots, I feel nervous. Do you find that your experience differs depending upon which political party dominates Congress? How do you manage negative bias directed at you and remain excited about your career? And all of those are such important questions. So Leila, I'm going to start, and I can actually, Erin, can we throw that question in the chat in case? Thank you so much. That's an awesome series of questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a great question. And I completely understand why you might feel a little nervous. We're currently sitting at the cusp of so many major crises here in the United States, from the rise of inequality to the climate crisis to the rise of authoritarianism across the world. And right now, we just happen to be seeing a right-wing resurgence in the United States on top of it, plus a pandemic and a resurgence of white supremacy. So it does feel like our plates are incredibly, incredibly full. And while I think that might be scary, I actually do think that these moments of crisis can really give us opportunity. I mean, this is what drove me to get into this field. I mean, unlike so many of the young faces that I see here, I didn't really dream about a career in national security, because I thought that security was something that other people did, until I started to realize that like the people who are supposed to be working in security weren't really hearing the perspectives of my communities and the places where I came from. So I first moved to Washington during the Trump administration, at a time when there was kind of human rights abuses, like the Muslim ban, and so many negative rhetoric. And it helped me see that like this is a space where I know that I could make an impact, and it was important that I bring my perspective. So I think it's nerve-wracking, but these crises can offer like moments of motivation and clarity. So kind of lean into that nervousness. And I think that these are big problems, and we need to work together to fix them.
Sorry, Maritza, before you go, I apologize. I get really nervous when I do introductions, and I forgot to introduce my colleague, Erin, who is actually in charge. She's the boss. So Erin, if you just please introduce yourself, and I apologize for that.
Absolutely no worries. I'm happy to be more behind the scenes. I'm Erin. I'm an associate program director with Girl Security. I'm the one sending you all the emails. And I'm also a master's student at the University of Notre Dame. And I am also really excited to meet all of you and engage with all of you today, because I think I also enter the national security space and I never considered that this was a space that I could also influence and work in. And so I'm really excited to hear all of your ideas today.
Thank you. Okay, Maritza, thank you so much.
Sure. And thank you so much, anyway, for asking that very, very important question. So when we talk about, I'm looking at your question, I want to make sure I answer all parts of it, since I have an opportunity, through MTA Visions to work in the halls of Congress, and we started our work under the Obama administration and the Trump administration, and continuing our work now with the new administration. So the first thing is, when you think about national security, right? One of the goals is to make sure that we're protecting the lives and safety of Americans. If you're an American, raise your hand, right? That's going to be everyone in this room. And so the one thing I want you to distinguish and take away is that fear, because you have every right to be in this place. Your voice has every right to be in all the rooms. And so a lot of times fear will hold us back. And so I want you to release the fear. So we'll take like 2 seconds. Fear release. All right. What is the experience like when you work with different political parties? So because I'm walking in a state of knowing who I am, right? And that first thing is, when I walk into any door, I don't walk in with my race, I don't walk in with my skin color, I don't walk in with my gender. I walk in with my nationality, American, right? And so, which means that I'm at a fair game as it pertains to the interests of my people, which then now I can start looking at how's my race impacted, how's my gender impacted in some of these spaces where traditionally we're not in the room. So going into the rooms with that perspective, it allows me to be much more comfortable. And so what that means is that whether I'm sitting with Democrats or Republicans and we're talking about national security, or we're talking about women, peace and security, or we're talking about women's economic viability across the globe, I make sure that I am not afraid to talk about my experiences. And so I bring a lot of, my narrative experiences. I bring a lot of the experiences of my clients or some of my colleagues and my friends and my family members into that room, that otherwise, if I wasn't in the room, they wouldn't have heard it, right? And what I found over time is that usually people, notwithstanding political parties, they're willing to listen and understand. And over time, the more that I show up, which is why it's so important, and I so much kudos to organizations like Girl Security, who's ensuring that they're equipping you not only with the knowledge, but also with the confidence, so that when you're in those rooms, you can stand proud and defend your interests, so that over time, the more we start to occupy these spaces with our thoughts, ideals, and our presence, then others have no choice but to hear us out, right? So how do I feel? I feel proud. I feel blessed. And so I make sure that I take in everyone's interests with me when I walk into those rooms. How do I manage the negative bias directed at myself? And how do I remain excited? Even with someone like me that's super positive, of course, there are many rooms that I've been in that are extremely negative. You walk in and you know that you're defeated in a sense, or you walk out and you know that everything you talked about was in deaf ears. And what I've taken from that, because I've experienced it from both political parties, is that, you know what, we need to go back and recruit more good people on both sides of the aisle to occupy these spaces. It's not even a party thing. It's just that we have bad leaders in place, or we have leaders who may have had good intentions at one point in time, but for whatever reason, they forgot the most important thing, right? That they're protecting America, and that we're here as Americans, and that these decisions that they're making shouldn't be super tied to a political party position, but keeping in mind how it's going to affect my fellow American, notwithstanding their party. And so how do I manage negative bias? I just remember people like you, to be honest, like who's coming behind me? Who do I need to clear the space for, so that when they enter, they don't have to experience as much negativity that I'm in? What are some organizations that are already doing the work that I can show up, so that maybe another, little girl can see me and say, oh, wow, she's doing it. I can do it as well too. How do I remain excited? Coming to great programs like this. Every time that I hear that there's so many other beautiful young ladies excited, block out the negativity by finding opportunities like this to talk to you and hopefully transfer my excitement to you as well too, so that you can carry the torch in national security.
So I don't really want to reiterate what a lot has been said, because I want to make sure that all of your questions get answered. But something that I've been thinking about is I have served now both under both administrations as we're sort of going into the next one. And for me specifically, like in my job, there are certain things we haven't been able to talk about, certain things that have not been made aware or highlighted or emphasized. However, when you talk to experts or people who have been in the space, you learn how to tailor certain language so that it still gets to the point, but it might just not be as overtly there. So there's different ways to get around it. And that's sort of one of the ways that I've found to hedge who I'm working with, to make sure that we're still meeting our goal, and our goal is inclusivity and equity for everyone. And something that I've also seen that me managing sort of my negative bias or remaining excited is getting, like Maritza said, getting involved with organizations like this, understanding and knowing that there are a lot of people that stand with you. So like no matter what, you are never alone in this space. Like looking at the room here, looking at WCAPS, at Out in National Security, at all these organizations, I found really strong homes in these spaces, and being able to talk about those negative biases that I have run into, or talk about how I'm feeling, and understanding, like learning how to deal with them and learning how other people have dealt with them. And also just for me is living my true self. So living as I do, a queer woman of color in the space sometimes isn't the most fun, to say it politely, but the more that I do that, and the more that I'm comfortable in myself, the more that people start to see how I carry myself and what I'm saying and what I'm doing. And that confidence gives them pause. Like, so even if there's someone that is hell-bent or like really strong against something, a lot of times like how I carry myself, or when I try and meet them where they are. For example, when we talk about sex and gender, a lot of times when I go into a room, I usually try and figure out, where are we in this conversation? Can I talk about LGBT? Can I talk about gender non-conforming, non-binary? Or do I have to go all the way and teach that sex is different than gender? So doing that and understanding that a lot of times people aren't coming from a place of hate, they're coming from a place of ignorance. And a lot of times more people will be willing to listen and to just be open, has helped me to sort of combat those negative things that I hear. Now, that's not always to say that they aren't always being mean or trying, like, negative or trying to learn, but for the most part, really the support and just meeting people where they are has been something that has really helped me.
Yeah, I think I want to focus on the political part of this question, since I work in politics, and I want to say that sometimes, and this is a very kind of like cynical view, but it's the reality, is that politics determines a lot of the positions that people are going to take and what is on brand with their party or with the caucus that they're a part of, or the group that they identify with at home, their constituents. That really colors a lot of what they talk about and how the positions that they take. And I think the way to overcome that is make it, politically damaging for you to be on the wrong side of history. And I think we saw that a lot with the riots, the protests this summer with George Floyd, where we had people from both sides of the aisle, politicians from both sides of the aisle, condemning racism and, speaking out and saying that people should, we should embrace diversity. I pulled up this statement that Senator Marco Rubio, who's on the Republican Party, gave last month, where he said that going forward, the GOP, or the Republican Party, must be a multi-ethnic, multiracial coalition of hardworking Americans who love their country. And the reason he said that, even though he's in the Republican Party, is because he knows that it makes sense because Americans are tired of seeing racial injustice on our streets happening every day. And we're seeing videos of people being killed with police brutality. And it's not okay. However, and in the same press release, he said, voters rejected the Democrats' vision of America in a irredeemably racist country that can only be saved by a revolution by the radical left-wing activists and funded by wealthy elites in the media, Silicon Valley and Wall Street. I mean, you know, he has to stay on brand with his party and make sure that he's saying that as well. So I wanted to give that as an example of how people change their opinions or they do things based on what is, you know, politically advantageous for them. And so we have to make it advantageous to be on the right side of national security. And I'll give an example. When I worked in refugee and immigration advocacy, one thing that we really harped on was that the refugee resettlement program was a bipartisan program that was introduced under the Reagan administration, a Republican president. And so it should not be a partisan issue to support refugee resettlement in the US. This is about upholding American values and making sure that people who need our help are given that help because our country can provide it. And that was something that we really focused on. And we had members of Congress on both sides of the aisle signing on to our letters, participating in our press conferences that talked about welcoming refugees. Now, yes, we have a Trump administration that really wanted to decimate the refugee resettlement program and bring it down to almost zero. And there wasn't much that people could do in opposition to that, as opposed to maybe going to Congress and asking for help. And now that the Biden administration has come in, they're completely changing that and want to accept 125,000 refugees, which is amazing. You know, sometimes there's only so much you can do, and that's just, again, politics. So I think continuing to have these voices on both sides of the aisle and reminding people of the American values that we share is a really good way to come together and try to move things forward when it is politically opportune to do so. And that's just the way it rolls in DC, and that's what you got to know.
Yeah, I have a pretty similar experience. I worked in the Senate when, under primarily the Obama administration, but I also worked during the Trump transition. I worked in the Senate when the House Democrats were in the majority and when they were in the minority. I worked as majority general counsel and minority general counsel. I had the benefit of not just working for three very strong women, but three moderates. So I felt like I had permission to seek that middle ground and was probably less influenced by kind of the whims of kind of party politics, and was able to kind of work with those across the aisle to find solutions. And so I found that even though when parties changed and different folks were in power, my mission stayed the same. It was to create the best policy possible for the greatest number of people. And I think in terms of how do you deal with that bias towards you? I mean, it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's there's a tendency to want to internalize it, to make it about you. And for me personally, my way of dealing with that was to just to work as hard as I possibly could. I'd walk into a meeting and people on the other side, they may judge me and they may exclude me, but they are, sure as heck not going to outwork me. I'm going to know every issue. I'm going to know who's in the chair across from me. I'm going to know, what they want to talk about. I'm going to know, and I'm going to know my response. So I think for me, work ethic was probably the way that I controlled, my response to that, and staying excited was, frankly, it was doing things like this, but it was also, being an SME in my field, right? It was, having worked so hard, you know the issues, people come to know you, and you feel like you can get over that imposter syndrome just a little bit easier as a result.
I feel as though I'm learning a lot and downloading a lot, which is really awesome. And as I'm thinking of this, I mean, I think my age is always something on my mind because I spend a lot of time with girls. And one of the things that I really sympathize with is, especially with respect to the insurrection at Capitol Hill, was how profound a moment that was. And it was akin to me of certainly 9/11, but actually the years after that, of watching kind of the ways in which the war shaped our nation and the world, and having to figure that out. It can feel very lonely. So there's that piece of it. So having voices representing different perspectives is so key. And then I think the other thing I had a thought about was I was doing an interview for Girl Security, and the interviewer, who was a man, said to me, does it get easier? You know, the more hardship you have as a result of being a woman, for example, in a male dominated field, does it get easier? And I thought that was such an interesting question. And my answer really isn't, it doesn't necessarily get easier, but in a way you become more resilient and you find, you know, supportive people and networks and all of the things that we're talking about. But I have found, and I thought what Amanda Gorman's poem was resonated quite deeply with me. I always have really loved women's poetry, especially women's military poetry and suffrage poetry, often which is left out of anthologies. And so I think there are ways too to kind of ground yourself in understanding the historical struggles as well of women. It's somewhat reassuring in a warped way to kind of know and relate to past historical struggles. And so one more question, and Amy, I'm gonna flip the the order this time. We have one more question, and then we'll break out into our rooms where we're going to kind of work through some of the specific scenarios that all of our panelists have confronted. And I think this is a great question by Sammy. The security sector is making steps strengthening diversity and inclusion. But what does successful diversity and inclusion look like? How do more traditional security folks respond to these pushes in progressive directions? And I think that is an awesome question. I don't know if Sammy's on the call, actually, I didn't see, but Sammy, if you're on the call, it's an awesome question. How do we measure diversity and inclusion? So Amy, I thought maybe we just reverse, and I have my paper here so I can work backwards.
You know, I think that's an excellent question, because I don't know that we really know. D&I, which is the diversity, equity, inclusion kind of professional space, is relatively new. You know, and it's kind of an amorphous you know, area. It's you know, I actually think you know, recently we saw President Biden overturn an executive order 13950, which basically served to eliminate all education and training on diversity and inclusion across the federal government. You know, so I think in that way, you know, we're still kind of figuring out what success looks like, and we're still having to combat you know, real obstacles to getting towards success, whether that's, you know, an increased number of you know, various underserved, socially and economically disadvantaged communities in the federal government, in national security roles, in you know, in the private sector, you know, working in industry, you know, I think, or is it, you know, kind of a general education, overall understanding by those in the majority and minority that you know, what does diversity mean and that it's good? You know, I think we're still trying to figure that out, particularly as a country that seems so divided. But yeah, I think for me, success is not being the only person in the room that looks like me. And I think, you know, organizations like Girl Security and WCAPS is you know, absolutely pivotal in ensuring that we reach that success at some point in the future.
Warda?
Yes, I would definitely agree with all of that. And I will add that when I think about success in diversity and inclusion, I look at the beginning and the middle of the pipeline to get people to these upper level positions, because it's not just about checking the box at the top and saying like, okay, we have 2 people from this background, we have 1 person from this background. It's what are we doing to ensure that more people of diverse backgrounds are making it through the pipeline, are entering these careers, are supported as they go through middle management, and then as they're rising through their careers. It's very, very difficult. By the time you get to the top, if you make it to the top and you still have to face discrimination, it's very difficult. And so I think looking at all parts of the process and making sure that people have access, they have education, they have the resources and tools to understand how to make it and how to succeed in the career is very important to start at a very early age, which is why I'm really grateful for this program, because you guys are young, you are you know, able to learn about these things. I didn't have anybody to teach me this when I was young. I had to figure it out by myself. I actually changed my career from corporate tax accounting to work in policy. And I did that as a result of, doing a lot of work at the local level and talking to like lawyers and stuff about, hey, what do you do at the national level? What are some things that I could do? And then figuring out that I wanted to study foreign policy to really focus on Islamophobia here at home and abroad, and national security as well. So I wish that I had had mentors at an early age to teach me, to guide me. And that's why I'm so passionate about giving back to these types of causes, why I do career coaching for young people. And I just want to make sure that people have the resources and tools to get up to the point so that when it does come, when people are looking for diverse candidates, there's a lot of people to choose from.
Yeah, to piggyback off what Warda was saying, understanding the barriers that are there that aren't necessarily in legislation, that aren't necessarily obvious barriers, but talking about education, transportation, we see this a lot, especially in women in the military, honestly, like the work-life balance. And every year the Navy comes out with a question of why aren't women staying in the Navy? And every year we tell them the same thing, and it's still a big question mark in the survey results. And it's because we keep talking about family care plans. We talk about the stress or all of the different burdens and what society puts on you in terms of gender norms and barriers and all these things that no one really talks about. And so it's identifying and listening to people when they give you that opportunity and they tell you like, hey, this might not seem to be an issue for you, but this is an issue for me. And another way that I think I sort of measure success or progress is for people to sit in a room like that's not a person of color, to sit in a room and look and be like, there are only white people in this space and there are only white men, there's something wrong. And to not have us as people of color and not have our experiences and like how we do this over and over, like our emotional labor, be what pushes people over that edge, like for people to really start to understand that you need diverse perspectives in the room. And we are starting to get there with different executive orders or different things like that. But I have seen and been met with derision with the traditional security folks. But it's always the same argument, right? They talk about, well, I'm going to go from the military perspective. The military is not a social experiment, as they like to say all the time. Like, adding women into the military, like we're not a social experiment. I don't understand why we're doing this. Adding people of color, I don't get why we're doing this. It's going to break down the force. LGBT with the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, all of these different things, the repeal of the trans ban. It's the same old argument every time, and every time it's been proven wrong. And so trying to get past that barrier of the arguments and show them in a like I think Warda was saying, like the politically smart thing to do, saying like, look, this didn't break down our country. Our country is not in flames because of this specific thing. Now, do you want to be on the right side of history to push for this, to push for equity and inclusion? So it's measuring success is hard. And then, but also like really these opportunities to build up people and to build that education all the way up to where you do have people in those high levels. And because it does take a lot of time and effort to really start on that. And we do still get questions of things, or like when we sit on panels, or I like to call them, and a lot of people call them manels, where the excuse is like, well, I couldn't find a woman who is an expert, or I couldn't find like a person of color who is an expert. And we like it's easily proven false. There are thousands of experts out there with so much expertise and like so much local experience on the ground that it's just like, and WCAPS and Girl Security, everyone does such a good job of this soon, like building up those portfolios and the places where we can literally like throw a binder down and be like, no, here are the people, here are the experts that have been in this space, and here's the opportunity to lift them up. So that's, yeah, I could talk about this for a long time, so I'm just gonna stop it there.
Yeah, I'm just going to piggyback to all the great things you said, Rachel. I mean, I agree with you 100%. You know, for us, you know, MTA Visions, we have the unique opportunity of working from a consulting perspective. So we get to come into these corporations, local agencies, governments, and help them be more intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so two things we always tell them when they're asking us, how do we measure success? How do we know that we're successful in incorporating DEI in our respective agencies? And we tell them we want to measure it from thought and in action. When we talk about, diversity, equity, inclusion in thought, we're talking about it from a theoretical perspective. First, we need to define what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means, right? We need to really come together and agree on what that global definition is going to be, because when we work with our clients in London, it's one thing, and we work in the States, it's one thing. Depending if you're in the South or if you're the public and private sector, it's something totally different. And so one is defining that. Two, when we're talking about thought, we want to make sure that we're integrating cultural competency in the classrooms. And so we work with a lot of universities to help them figure out, well, what does it mean to evolve our existing curriculums so that the students that we're graduating are graduating with a level of global cultural competency, which includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only just abroad, but also at home. And then when we start to look at the action piece, this is especially important with our corporate clients when they'll say, hey, can you help us find a chief diversity officer? And we say, sure, we can help you do that. But that's not enough, right? We need to make sure that that chief diversity officer actually has the same rights and privileges that the CEO has, that the CEO and the C-suite actually believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just that it's going to just one person and it's that sole person's job to ensure that it becomes a part of that company's culture. And then when we talk about culture, it's not just ensuring that we're in those spaces, but once we're in those spaces, is it a safe space, right? And so diversity, equity, inclusion, there's so much that comes to it when we're looking at measuring success. But for us, we always kind of, take a step back and say, we're going to look at the thought pool. Are you incorporating it in the research? Are you incorporating in the minds of the students that were graduating in their respective universities? And are we incorporating in action? And we have a series called Beyond the Hashtag, because we're on accountability mode with especially our corporate clients, beyond the hashtag. The action that we're looking for is that we want to be in the rooms. Yes, we want more of us in the rooms, but when we're in the room, we want to be heard. After we're heard, we actually want what we've said to actually be implemented. Once it's implemented, we actually want to feel safe in that space. And so for us, we believe that if we're going to start to measure success, all these things in totality need to come into place. And we're getting there. And with the next generation coming, that's following, that's ensuring that we're keeping both public sector and private sector accountable, is going to be great. So I'm really excited. Again, thank you for organizations like Girl Security. Thank you for organizations like WCAPS that are being intentional about raising the next generation so that they can keep these systems and structures accountable.
So these are all such incredibly powerful answers. And just to me, as just building on what everyone said, success isn't just the presence of women and people of color and LGBTQI people in these spaces. It's about whether those individuals have the power to shape the spaces they're in. And I also think it's a matter of framing. So diversity isn't just about adding new faces and new perspectives into the room. It's about giving people the representation that we already deserve. So it's not a bonus, it's just getting us back up to the bare minimum so that we all feel a little less like imposters in this space. And I think whenever you feel like an imposter or nervous, that's totally natural, because these spaces weren't really built for us, and they weren't really built to listen to us or to look like us. So that's why they can feel really intimidating, and that's why we need to change them. And I think eventually we can measure success by whether people who look like us can actually enter without feeling like imposters. And on whether these traditional folks push back, I think oftentimes they do. And when they do, it's not always just super aggressively or loudly. Sometimes it's just with silence or a refusal to acknowledge you or to give you the space to talk about your stuff. Because they don't really see that we are experts, and they don't really see the value that we add in this space. So I think what the hard thing is that we just have to keep pushing through that silence and making noise and making sure that we are holding them accountable to making sure that like we are given the space that we are owed when we're having these conversations, because conversations about security impact us all. So we are owed a seat at the table, and they've held it for too long. And it's like, we're now here to reclaim it.
So we're going to be breaking out into groups, and I thought just that the comment about the space not being built for us, I think is so important, because the legacy of those ideals in those institutions persevere. And, you know, someone tweeted something the other day asking if an opinion was gendered, and the only response in my mind that I had was, well, I guess because it departs from ideals that white men have established that 100+ years ago, then I guess anything that's not white male is gendered. But the reality is that, you know, someone used a great idea of, you know, when you go to the doctor and you get a diagnosis, you know, and you have 100 doctors in front of you and you're only hearing from 49 of them, you want to know what the other 51 doctors have to say. And I think we're at a place where we can start the conversation and keep it going. But I hope that after today, especially, you feel that you can be part of the solution. And I don't mean solution, put that on your shoulders, save the world. I mean, just engage in the discourse, because I think that has an extremely powerful impact in the aggregate over time. So we're going to break out into groups, and we're going to work through some of these scenarios, and we will come back in about 25 minutes and do a quick debrief. I really appreciate all of the participants, as well as our awesome panelists, women of color advancing peace and security, out in national security. As I said at the outset, you know, we're learning how hard it is for high schools, especially, to talk about this really important intersection of racial injustice, national security, democracy, trust in institutions, all of these things. And as I said, I think it's about creating a space for the opportunity to opt into that discourse, as well as live out some of the values and leadership strengths that I know I saw in our group, and I know all of the panelists exhibit every day in their lives, as do the participants. That's a really big part of our program, is to identify that all of us in our respective experiences grow up in a society that often fails to, quote unquote, secure us. And so we work outside of the systems to problem solve, which I think makes us innovators. And so I would encourage all of you to, if you're not already a mentee, and I know some of you are, check out our mentee program, check out WCAPS. They have awesome opportunities. As we said, we're going to continue to partner together on these types of opportunities, as well as skills-based training, professional development, community building, all of these awesome things. And we're happy to answer any questions that we can from all of you as a follow-up to this event. And I don't know if the panelists are willing or able, but if we can share everyone's email addresses, we will, and that way you can reach out and make sure that you can follow up with some of those questions. And if any of the panelists or our team, Aaron or Rachel, if you have anything to add with the last few minutes, please do. Please do.
Thank you to everyone for participating. And if anyone wants to share any insights, Rachel, I saw you unmuted from their breakouts. That's most welcome. We really appreciate you attending, but also engaging, because I know it can be hard online. So we really appreciate your time and also your attention.
I just wanted to say that I was really, really grateful for the discussion that we had in our group. We only went into one of the scenarios, but I think it was really necessary to have the discussion that we did, especially with like LGBT and things like that. And so the insights that everyone had were great. And I wish, as I said in the group, I wish we had more time and just hours to talk about all this stuff, and just to talk about everything and all of the difficulties, or if you want to vent, or if you have any sort of things, like these are the spaces to do it. Like these are safe spaces, and these are spaces that there's loads of expertise, and we're all here to help you get to where we wish we were back in the day, but also to help you get to where we are now and much further than we will ever be, because that's what we should be looking forward to, is looking forward to the future and making sure that all of you get to where you want to be and be your true selves. So thank you.
I'll just add that for the people that came, I think it's really great that you guys took advantage of this opportunity, and part of being a leader is bringing other people with you. So I would encourage you to tell other people about this program, share your experience that you went through today, and make sure that more people are plugged in to this resource and to this world and this conversation, because you're going to need friends and allies during this journey. So the more people that you can bring with you, the earlier, the better. And thank you to Girl Security for hosting this event and for having us. I really enjoyed it and had such a good time in my breakout room.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I completely echo what's already been said, and thank you to all of you guys for being so fully present. As I was telling people in my group, I am pretty much your age or around your age, and I'm also still like navigating the first few steps in security and figuring out how to like make the most impact in this field. So I really hope you all consider me as a peer and just reach out, because I'm so excited to like dive into this journey with you, because we are all in each other's corner, and I can't wait to work with you guys either today or in the future, because I'm sure you guys are all going to do amazing, amazing things.
Yeah, I just wanted to support my fellow panelists and thank you so much, Girl Security. One of the questions that I asked everyone when we first started is why Girl Security? So now I am sold, and I would love to definitely stay involved with Girl Security, because I believe that what you guys are doing is so important to ensure that we're not only just being the practitioners that we are in this field, but that we're also grooming the next generation that can carry on the torch, so that all this work is not in vain. I agree with Rachel. We also had opportunity to really dive into our first breakout group, but then the second one we brought it in because it was so important, because it was really focusing on what advice would we give our leaders right now as it pertains to what occurred on the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. And everyone resoundingly talked about unity, reminding our leaders that we've entrusted them, like we've given them the power. So now they need to represent the people, or else we will replace them. The second thing was that, this is an opportunity for us to really listen to everyone, because in spite of, differing opinions, we all have a voice. At the end of the day, we're all one America. And so, it's very important for us to listen more in this season. But like everyone has mentioned, like I'm really, really excited to stay in touch. I encourage all of you, you're much further than a lot of us were at your age, now that you want to enter this space. So definitely leverage this opportunity. I'm sure that Girl Security has so many other great resources. Stay in touch. A lot of times I'll talk at these different events and you guys will be really excited, but you guys don't follow up. So I challenge you to follow up, email us. We will make time for you, because we understand that we're privileged to be in the spaces that we are. And so we're very much committed to ensuring that you're a part of it. And WCAPS as well also has a great pipeline program as well. So if you you want to really kind of focus on national security or look at different intersections, that would be a great program. And through MTA Visions, we also have a program called Youth Leading Now. And it's a training program that we partner with different countries around the world to get youth engaged in both politics and diplomacy right now. So whether it's helping them to run for office or to become youth appointees or representatives in their respective governments as it pertains to diplomacy. So stay in touch with me. I put my email address in the chat box. And if you email me, I'll give you my number. I know someone in our group said, hey, if I have a quick question about something that's happening in school, can I reach out? Absolutely. Myself and all my other fellow panelists are here to support you through your educational journey, personally and professionally in this space. And we're excited for you guys to join us. And thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Erin, for your amazing work doing this day to day to pave the way for the future of national security.
Well, actually, all of you are doing the amazing work, so I appreciate it. Sorry, Amy, I didn't know if you wanted to add something.
No, just, contact me, reach out to me, consider me, a resource, a cheerleader, or just, an ear to listen. I'm happy and excited to connect with all of you.
Yeah, and even if you say like, hey, I'm not going to see you for a few months, you can always come back into the fold. I think that's one of the things that I was always so afraid to come back to an opportunity if I stepped away from it, because I felt like, oh, they're going to think I don't want to be involved. Like, we have a revolving door, at whatever point you feel like you need resources, that's why we're here. And the door is always open. That's why we don't have applications for mentees and so forth, you can always join and there will always be support for you. So we really appreciate taking your time. We appreciate you taking your time. It is always a privilege to serve all of you in this capacity, and we look forward to the next event. We have some really cool stuff coming up around climate change, some really cool professional development programming. We have some exciting announcements in the works, so door is always open. You know where to find us.